We're recording this. We are recording this presentation, and that'll help us write the notes, but it will also, assuming technology works in our favor, it will also be something that we can post along with the presentation materials. Next slide, please. So before we start, or as we start the meeting, we always like to start with a land acknowledgement to show our respect for the traditional lands that we're on. So to commence this meeting, we'd like to first take a moment to acknowledge the lands on which Windsor sits. This land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. We respect the longstanding relationships with First Nations people in this place, and also acknowledge that this territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties. Next slide, please. So this slide is really meant to help everybody with Zoom. So if you haven't been on Zoom for a while or ever, there's a number of things that we can help you out with. First of all, in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a bunch of square boxes in the word view. That is an opportunity for you to click on that and choose how you view this presentation and materials. My suggestion to you is there's a side-by-side presenter view. So I think it's called side-by-side speaker view. So if you click on the side-by-side speaker view, you will see the presentation in the middle, and you'll see whoever's speaking on the right-hand side. We ask that everybody keep their mics off unless you're actually speaking in the meeting, keep your mics off. So the left hand, you'll see in the graphic here, the left-hand button is your mic. So you can mute that and turn that on and off using that left-hand button. The next button on the to the right of that is the way you turn your video on and off. You can see who's a participant in the meeting with the participant buttons, the participant button in the middle. During the meeting, we are going to have Q&A opportunity. At the end of the meeting, we're going to have a Q&A opportunity. So there is two ways for you to participate in that. One, you can use the chat function. You can see that sort of in the middle there, the little speech bubble, and that opens up the window that you can chat comments or questions in, and you can do that at any point in time in the meeting. So in the middle of the presentation, feel free to chat any comments or questions that you might have, and we will bring those up at the end when we have the Q&A part of the meeting. And then there's a little happy face with a plus sign there called reactions, and within there is where you will find the place to raise your hand. So also we'll come back to that during the Q&A session. There is an option to raise your hand. If you're joining by phone, which I don't remember seeing anybody joining by phone, but if you're joining by phone, there are *6 is the button to mute and unmute yourself, and *9 is the button to raise your hand. That's the information for joining by phone. Laura, next slide, please. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to go through all sorts of information on this project, and really to talk through each type of infrastructure being planned for Sandwich South, and give you the information on the alternatives that were considered and the alternative that the team is putting forward as preferred, as well as speaking to the next steps such as staging and implementation. The team's looking for everyone's input on this material, and there is a lot to cover. So we did want to be able to provide you the actual walkthrough of this material tonight, and then it will be posted on the website, and you'll have up to September 30th to provide your comments and questions. So if you aren't able to get your comments and questions in today, there is that opportunity by looking at things on the website, and there's a survey as well. We are going to go through the whole presentation, the full approximately 45 minutes before we actually get to the question and answer session. So as I say, feel free to use the chat function during that time, or jot your questions down in notes, but please do keep your mics off for the 45-minute presentation. And then just one last comment, we have, as the slide shows, the presentation going till 7. In a conversation that we had yesterday, it was pointed out that there is a lot of material to cover, and that may not be enough time. So I did have a conversation with the team, and we agreed that we have the ability to extend that till 7:30. Unfortunately, from schedules, we can't go further than that, but should we need to, and we are happy to stay until 7:30. So we'll see how the meeting goes and how the question and answer session is going if we need that time. So that's all I wanted to say to all for starters, and we'll turn it over to Laura for the presentation.
Okay, thank you. I assume everyone can hear me, so I'll proceed with the next session. So we're just going to provide an overview of the project and the study area. So what is the Master Servicing Plan? So it's a long-term coordinated plan for municipal infrastructure within the Sandwich South area to support urbanization. The study will develop servicing strategies for future municipal drain improvements and overland flow drainage, stormwater management facilities and stormwater pump stations, sanitary and storm trunk sewers, as well as collector roadways. The study follows the municipal class environmental assessment process and will allow the city to proceed with implementation of Schedule B projects. For this study, the Schedule B projects include the stormwater management ponds and storm pump stations within the East Pelton and County Road 42 secondary plan areas, more specifically. And it's anticipated that many of the storm and sanitary sewers that are proposed to be implemented will be considered Schedule A or A prime projects. The collector roadways are likely going to require further consultation prior to implementation. And that's for most roadways where they span across multiple properties. Well, and we'll speak more to that when we get to that section. So as part of the study, there is also a Little River floodplain mapping study, which is happening concurrently. We'll also talk a little bit about that and provide an overview of how that information is being fed into this study. So the study area spans the southeast area of the city. It goes from EC Row Expressway from the north to Highway 401 to the south, and is between Walker Road to the west and the Banwell 10th concession corridor to the east. So within the study area, there are two secondary plan areas shown on the map. The purple highlighted area is the County Road 42 secondary plan area, and the orange highlighted area is the East Pelton area. So the focus of this servicing plan is to be able to allow the city and developers to develop the first phases of development and to set the stage for future phases. So lots of work has been completed to date. From a consultation and assessment perspective, we have held an in-person pop-up event in January 2020. Virtual PIC number 1 was held in September to October 2020 online. 2 stakeholder advisory committee meetings were held with a group of agencies and other property owners. Stage 1 archaeological study and natural environment assessment were completed for the entire study area. We've coordinated with agencies such as the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and coordination with the local conservation authority, IRCA, and that floodplain mapping study team. So we've evaluated alternatives for servicing this area, which is going to be the main discussion points of this meeting, and completed preliminary functional design, specifically the stormwater management and sanitary infrastructure. We've also had several meetings with property owners and other key stakeholders as part of this project. And some of you on this call we've met with either last week or are going to be later this week. So it's great to see you joining. So what we've heard in this development, in this consultation is listed here. So we've gotten questions on why Sandwich South when there are other areas in the city that can be developed, and when will development happen within this area? There's also some desire to see more than just auto-dependent community in this area, with more focus on active transportation needs. More information is needed from stakeholders on how active transportation and complete streets will be incorporated into the Sandwich South project. There's interest in how costs and impacts to taxpayers, and noting that it's important, and more information is needed. And there's a desire to keep green space within these lands as well. Protection against flooding has been a critical item that's been discussed with property owners as well as IRCA. And landowners are needing to understand if they are going to be impacted by land acquisition and what that looks like. So as part of this, we've also gotten comments on the community input, and we've gotten suggestions on how to have more interactive PICs, which is how this PIC and this virtual online meeting has didn't come about through those recommendations. So in addition to consultation and the work that we've done, the city has been preparing for this development for over a number of decades now, and completing various studies, and they're listed on this graphic on the right-hand side of the screen. These are also on the project website, so you can go to the project website to see this list, as well as PDF links to all of these documents. If you have any issues accessing any documents that you'd like to access, please let us know, and we can provide those. So the studies that were completed previously had provided recommendations and identified projects that we are now proceeding with under this study. And we'll talk more about that. So more specifically, how those studies feed into our recommendations are listed in the next slides. So future growth. Windsor is projected to grow in population from about 217,000 people in 2016 to approximately 225 people in 2036. So these 8,000 new residents will require services, housing, employment, and infrastructure to meet those needs. And it's anticipated that Sandwich South will accommodate some of this new population, and is shown in the approved East Pelton and County Road 42 secondary plans. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a land use map. This map has incorporated the findings of the 2 secondary plans for this area, as well as other growth studies completed within the city. This land use map is a draft map, and as functional design of the stormwater management corridors proceeds, as well as refinements to the internal collector road network, the land use map will be refined through this study. So now I will pass it over to Ryan, who will talk a little bit more on the Little River floodplain mapping study.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. So good evening to all members of the public currently attending this PIC2 for the Sandwich South Master Servicing Plan. My name is Ryan Langlois, and I am the lead water resource engineer at Dillon Consulting for both the Sandwich South Master Plan study, as well as the Little River Watershed Floodplain Mapping Study. As part of the overall study, an update to the existing regulatory Little River floodplain mapping was necessary to understand both existing and future flood risk and vulnerable areas, both within the Sandwich South Master Planning lands, as well as the remaining lands within the Little River watershed. The update to the regulatory floodplain mapping was completed in accordance with both the federal floodplain mapping framework, as well as the provincial technical guidelines for flood hazard mapping. The mapping is used to identify the existing flood conditions within the watershed under various major storm events. The existing condition floodplain mapping tool developed for the study will identify any changes to the flood lines under both initial build-out and ultimate build-out conditions within the Sandwich South Master Plan. It is a requirement that any build-out of development within the Sandwich South Master Plan have no adverse impacts on the results from this updated regulatory flood line for the Little River watershed. The overall findings of the updated mapping component of the study has been used to further refine the design of the Sandwich South Master Servicing Plan, to determine existing and future drainage capacity of the existing municipal drains in Little River, to confirm the allowable stormwater release rates for future development areas into the respective municipal drains, and to identify the required floodproofing requirements for the initial build-out areas. Next slide, please. Based on the ongoing work for the updated regulatory mapping, a 2-zone concept has been accepted by IRCA, as well as the third-party review team, for the existing condition floodplain update for the Little River watershed. This 2-zone concept would include the following: a primary floodway, or Zone 1, which is a designated flood hazard area where development is not permitted without a study to confirm that there's no adverse impacts or that the development provides floodplain compensation as necessary. The secondary flood fringe area, or Zone 2, is where development will be permitted, but is required to meet proper floodproofing standards based on, at a minimum, the designated flood fringe elevations from this study. Next slide, please. What you see here is an example of a draft regulated floodplain map that has currently been completed as part of the updated study for the Little River watershed. The blue area is the primary floodway, or Zone 1, and the red is an example of the secondary flood fringe in Zone 2. Next slide, please. To date, the regulatory floodplain computer models have been developed and finalized to establish the limits to the municipal drain Zone 1 primary floodway and Zone 2 flood fringe areas. The analysis has identified the limits to future development related to primary floodways. At this time, it has been determined that the East Pelton and the County Road 42 secondary planning development areas have been identified to be out of the primary floodway, but within the secondary or Zone 2 flood fringe area of the Little River watershed. This will require all developments to abide by the floodproofing requirements taken from the results of this study. The draft regulatory floodplain maps and respective floodline elevations for both Zone 1 and Zone 2 are currently being reviewed by the Essex Region Conservation Authority. As part of the next steps for the regulatory Little River floodplain mapping study is the maps and respective findings are to be finalized and further distributed for public consultation at a later date. This will be led by the Essex Region Conservation Authority. So from there, I will bring it back over to Laura to discuss the sanitary servicing and respective stormwater management.
Thanks, Ryan. We'll move on here. So from a sanitary servicing perspective, there have been previous studies completed for this area related to the sanitary servicing development. So there was a sanitary servicing report done for the annexed lands from the town of Tecumseh. And in that report and in those findings, trunk sanitary sewer was established to serve the Sandwich South area. Along with the trunk sewer, proposed sanitary trunk sewers were identified, and we are building on that study and proposing trunk sanitary sewers to service the balance of the area. So the map that you see on the screen here provides an overview of the trunk sanitary sewers. The purple sewers represent sewers that have already been constructed by the City of Windsor as part of that previous sanitary EA. And the red sewers represent proposed sanitary trunk sewers that will serve the proposed development. So sanitary trunk sewers are considered a Schedule A or A prime project where they're specifically installed within a municipal right-of-way. The timing of sanitary trunk sewers is dependent on development needs. Where possible, the city will incorporate sanitary trunk sewer improvements in any road reconstruction improvement projects as well. Costs for new connection of sanitary sewers will be assessed to property owners similar to other areas within the city, according to city policies. And it should be noted that as part of this study, the project team is assessing the remaining capacity of the existing Little River Pollution Control Plant to determine when future expansion studies need to proceed to accommodate development. So we'll move on to the stormwater strategy. So as a background, recommendations from the Upper Little River Watershed Master Plan Study were the basis for the stormwater management design and strategy for this area. IRCA, along with the City of Windsor and the town of Tecumseh, undertook this watershed study to determine the general stormwater management infrastructure requirements and to service both the existing and future. The service strategy recommended the use of grouped offline wet ponds within the stormwater management corridors along Little River and other municipal drains. The corridors have been allocated to accommodate future facilities, and the corridors were estimated to be about 200 to 325 meters in width. And these corridors would accommodate stormwater management ponds, municipal drain outlets and drains, recreational pathways, maintenance, access routes, as well as proposed outlet pump stations. The city anticipates finalizing this report to bring it forward to council in fall 2021. As those recommendations become formalized, the study will proceed and be completed after that point. So in addition, as Ryan had gone through, there's a regulatory floodplain study occurring, which are establishing requirements for future development of this area. As development proceeds, there are minimum requirements for how buildings and other design can occur. So those include that minimum building finished floor elevations for new development shall be at or above regulatory 1 in 100 year flood fringe levels. This is to mitigate surface flooding within private property and prevent property damage during those major events. And the second is that required minimum road grades shall be below the regulatory flood fringe levels and allow for overland flow routing. And this is to direct the overland flow to the proposed stormwater management ponds and ensure that future development does not impact existing development. Also, all stormwater management infrastructure must meet minimum and local and regional guidelines, and where possible, implementing higher levels of service to mitigate impacts of climate change and provide flexibility in the system will be considered. So through the mapping study, it was determined, and the initial strategy of the study, it was determined that to accommodate the first stages of development, that drainage from the existing drains, south of the proposed east-west arterial drain roadway, will need to be diverted away from the initial build-out areas and routed to the upper reaches of the Little River Drain. So in this map here on the right-hand side of the screen, this is showing the section of the study area south of Baseline Road, and the east-west arterial road is this thicker gray line, and the associated drain is this blue line underneath. So this is a new drain being proposed as part of this study to divert the drainage from north-south drains located south of the study area, intercept those flows and direct them to the Little River Drain and reduce impacts on the upper reaches to provide possible development. So the drain would intercept flows from the 7th concession drain, 8th concession drain, Hayes drain, and 9th concession drain. The existing drains north of the east-west arterial drain can be abandoned as needed, and those flows will be accommodated within the future stormwater management ponds. The city is undertaking a separate drainage study related to the implementation of this drain, and those immediately impacted will be contacted separately, and will likely be reached. The city will reach out in the fall 2021. So as part of the study, the need to provide a framework for stormwater servicing was identified. A comprehensive framework will provide guidance to developers to ensure that development occurs in an orderly fashion. And there's opportunity to utilize the stormwater management corridors to accommodate linear ponds and municipal drain improvements, as well as utilizing storm sewers and a storm sewer network. So options for both storm water management ponds and storm servicing methods were evaluated, and we'll talk about that next. So from a stormwater management pond perspective, 4 options were reviewed. Options 1A and B are described here, used where we're proposing wet ponds to provide quantity and quality control of stormwater runoff. A typical wet pond cross section is located on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, where a permanent pool about 1.5 meters deep would be included, and this would provide the necessary quality treatment. Option B is similar to option A, as however, included is the use of low impact development measures to manage quantity of runoff and quality at the source. Low impact development measures provide benefit to the system. However, due to local soil conditions, it was determined that LIDs cannot be relied on as the sole source of quantity and quality control. LIDs, just for everyone on the call, are low impact development measures that are such as inline exfiltration sewer measures, bioswales, permeable pavements. They're measures that can be taken upstream that provide quality and quantity control. But it was identified that they cannot be the sole source of those control measures. It should be noted that due to the proximity of the ponds to the airport, that the presence of waterfowl mitigation measures would be required, as the presence of any waterfowl would pose safety concerns. And this was considered in the evaluation of alternatives. Option 2A and 2B use dry ponds instead of wet ponds and compensate for the lower quality treatment capability. Localized on-site quality controls would be required. These two options are similar, except that option B also includes LIDs, which we spoke about. Again, in this instance, LIDs would not be suitable as a main type of stormwater quality control. Therefore, on-site controls would be required. On-site controls could include oil and grit separator units on private properties in order to meet minimum water quality standards. Dry ponds do not provide quality control. However, it will be effective at reducing waterfowl habitat in this instance. And below is a cross-section of a typical dry pond. And in this case, there, in most dry weather conditions, isn't a permanent pool of water. And most of the depression is active storage. So I'll provide you a, so the preliminary preferred is option 1A, the wet stormwater management pond facility. These facilities provide water quality control to mitigate the need for inline and on-site quality controls, which are costly and difficult to maintain to ensure that they have proper effectiveness. They're more easily can accommodate added resiliency to account for climate change. And stormwater management corridors incorporate natural spaces and linkages, adding an element of green infrastructure to the corridors. The stormwater management ponds must meet all stormwater management regional requirements. And then for the wet ponds, they must consist of features to mitigate waterfowl as required by the airport. So we have had discussions with airport staff as part of the study and are coordinating with them to make sure that we're meeting all those requirements. Features could include minimizing permanent pool widths, and designing the ponds to have necessary landscape, such as plantings and other waterfowl mitigation along flanks, including trees and other woody shrubs. Also, consideration for initial waterfowl mitigation after pond construction prior to the growth of mature vegetation. And this includes also regular maintenance to ensure that these types of measures are implemented and continuously functioning. So stormwater management pond and pump stations are considered Schedule B projects, and approval of this study will allow the city to proceed with property acquisitions and construction of these facilities, specifically within the East Palatine and County Road 42 areas. So just to understand more on how these pump stations operate, this is a cross-section of a typical pond, which is a slice through of a pond. The wet pond would have a permanent pool of water, which is shown in the purple. And the sewers and overland flow routes from development come in, as shown on the right. The active storage area, which is highlighted in the light blue, would accommodate that inflow from the development. And the active storage area would be emptied slowly at a slow rate and pumped out to the drain or little river. The pond itself will be flanked by buffers that can accommodate both pathways as well as maintenance corridors. So this is an overview of the study area showing a plan view of the proposed stormwater management ponds. These are draft pond locations based on a functional design that's been completed to date. So these light blue areas represent the footprint of the pond. The darker green areas represent the stormwater management corridors identified in the Upper Little River watershed study. Where possible, areas dedicated for stormwater management would be reduced, and that will be reflected in the ultimate land use plan developed for this area. So each pond segment will outlet to the adjacent drains via pump stations, which is represented with these green square areas. So moving on, storm sewer servicing. To provide storm sewer servicing, 3 options were looked at. These include option 1, do nothing, option 2, implement a storm sewer network, and option 3, implement a combined storm sewer network and open drain network. Option 2 is considered a preliminary preferred option as it requires less land to implement, has a relatively low comparative maintenance costs. And also as part of a consideration in this project, we are looking at providing resiliency to the system and designing trunk storm sewers at a higher level of service, in this case, a 10-year level of service, which is greater than the regional stormwater management guidelines. So in addition to the stormwater management infrastructure required, opportunities to incorporate natural heritage features into the corridors to protect and preserve and where appropriate enhance the environment will be looked at. Connections between existing natural heritage features may include a variety of habitats and vegetation communities to allow for a variety of flora and fauna. Natural heritage features and natural plantings will be incorporated into the pond designs to deter waterfowl as a safety measure in the vicinity of the airport, as we discussed. And these interim methods to mitigate waterfowl habitat may be needed prior to vegetation reaching full maturity. So exactly what that looks like is not determined at this time, but we are working with the city to develop the natural environment system strategy, and that will be incorporated. So we will move on to transportation at this time. Give everyone a second to gather their thoughts, and we can move on. So at the onset of this project, it was determined that to support growth and associated transportation needs within the study area, the project team determined that the road network would need to be expanded to support all modes of transportation and not focus solely on vehicular access. So problems identified include that the current road network can only support a limited level of growth, that there's a lack of road capacity to serve full growth potential of the area. The existing network would only support a few sidewalk and cycling facilities, and that there's a lack of connection options within this network connecting to the east and west. So opportunities stemming from that are to identify a shared road network to support growth in the area and preserve space for future road networks, as well as sidewalks and cycling facilities, and accommodate future transit service. This is all to establish a long-term plan to improve the existing road network. The two options were looked at related to the refinement of the road network. Number one, maintaining the conceptual road network layout laid out in the County Road 42 and East Pelton secondary plan areas. And the second option is to modify the road network developed previously and make modifications to provide better connectivity to areas outside of the two secondary plan areas. It was determined that option 2 was the most preferred. This is all part of a transportation network analysis that's being undertaken by Dillon Consulting, where we are looking at projected traffic volumes and which will be based on full build out of the project area. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. So in addition to that more broader level problem and opportunities, there are 5 other more specific areas of opportunity that were identified. It should be noted that the northeast portion of the study area, north of County Road 42, which is not shown on this map, was also included in the analysis. However, most of the development yield is within this area. And that northern area is established based on existing road network and associated EAs that better focus on that area. So most of these opportunities do focus on the south area, but that northern area is part of our study. So the first opportunity is to support the anticipated growth within the southeast portion of the study area. One of the 2 main north-south collector road corridors in the east area will need to be widened from a 2-lane cross-section to a 4-lane cross-section. Based on a very comparative evaluation, option 2, which is the widening of 9th concession from a 2-lane cross-section to a 4-lane cross-section, was determined to be preferred versus widening of the 10th concession road from a 2 to a 4-lane cross-section. The reasoning behind option number 2 being preferred is that concession 9 is more central to the southern portion of the study area, and the 10th concession has intersection restrictions at County Road 42 with a right in, right out only lanes proposed through the completed County Road 42 EA. So opportunity number 2 is similar to opportunity number 1. Widening of a north-south collector within the west side of the southern area was identified. We looked at 2 options, those being the widening of the 7th concession from a 2-lane to a 4-lane cross-section, and option 2, which is the widening of 8th concession from a 2-lane to a 4-lane. Based on our comparative assessment, option 2, widening of the 8th concession roadway, is more preferred. And this is due to the 8th concession roadway being more central to the study area, making it more useful to residents, employees, and visitors. Improvements to the 8th concession will allow for a larger portion of the Sandwich South lands to benefit, and it'll be easier for residents to make internal trips within the study area. The third opportunity is the connection of the establishment of an east-west collector within the study area. 4 options were looked at. The preliminary preferred option is option 4, which includes a collector roadway that would span from 7th concession to County Road to the east extent of the study area, and it would avoid using existing roads such as Joy Road, and it would also connect to roads proposed within the East Pelton area. Option 4 is looking at the additional east-west connection to Walker Road. In this case, we looked at whether a connection with Walker Road would add value to the area or not, basically. And the preliminary preferred option in this case was to not include an additional connection to Walker Road at this time, because providing a connection to Walker Road would have immediate impacts on businesses on Walker Road, as well as 7th concession. Option 1 is also preferred, as it will not require property acquisition. And we do want to note that as development occurs, there should be consideration to provide active transportation linkages from Walker Road area to the East Pelton area. And that will be potentially incorporated into future planning studies related to the transportation component. So the final transportation component is the baseline road opportunity. The section of baseline road between 7th concession and 8th concession road is currently residential. And we looked at options on how to manage the traffic in that area. These include doing nothing, option 1, option 2, putting a dead end on baseline road at 8th concession road, and option 3, instituting traffic calming measures. So option 3, which is providing traffic calming measures, was determined as the preliminary preferred, as it provides a more direct emergency access, supports collector road network growth, and does not require property acquisition. So ultimately, based on all of those opportunities and the completion of the transportation analysis, the proposed collector road network is shown on the right-hand side of the screen. So this road network shows all the arterial roads that were identified in the previous EAs, as well as the proposed collector road network. It does not show proposed roads, local roads or laneways required to support local subdivisions or commercial developments. In many cases, the Schedule C environmental assessment will be required to establish the road alignments and connections to arterial roadways. And the city will need to coordinate with adjacent municipalities as required where these roadways meet external areas. All proposed collector and arterial roadways will require facilities to provide active transportation, and these would need to be safe and comfortable for all ages and abilities. The infrastructure shall be in keeping with the city's upcoming Complete Streets guideline as well. Recommendations for the active transportation network are shown on the figures that will be placed on the website for review. These are based on the traffic analysis that has been completed, but ultimately will be dependent on the development needs for the area. So in addition, a draft transit network has also been looked at. I won't go through this figure in detail, but it builds on the recommendations from the 2019 Transit Master Plan and shows additional routes that are proposed for this area to support full build out. So we'll move on to the mitigation and implementation and staging component of this project, which talks about more on how this infrastructure will be implemented. So potential impacts and mitigation. This is not a full list, but it is some of the main components of potential impacts. So first is the construction and maintenance. So prior to construction, property owners will be informed about upcoming construction. The use of construction best management practices to minimize disruption, such as controlling dust and following noise bylaws, will be implemented. From a property impacts perspective, property acquisition or easements will be required where necessary. Compensation for those property acquisition areas will require further consultation with affected property owners. From an archaeological perspective, where necessary, stage 2 archaeological assessments will be required prior to construction. And notification of appropriate agencies will be required if unexpected resources are uncovered during construction. From a natural environment perspective, solutions will minimize tree removal where possible and replace any trees removed. Development of mitigation plans to protect terrestrial and aquatic habitat are required, and necessary permits and approvals will be required. From a staging perspective, the project currently has a number of capital works projects for this area. Here's a limited list of some of those projects. They include the Lausanne Parkway County Road 42 intersection improvements, the Drainage Act report for the East-West Arterial Drain, as well as the construction to divert the drainage from the south portion of the Sandwich South area, which we talked about previously. It includes the 7th and 9th concession road improvements to support the first stages of development. And it includes the first phase of the East-West Arterial Road construction at Walker Road. Timing of these improvements is related to development. So the capital works budget has been allocated, but exact timing is dependent on immediate development needs. The study will allow stormwater management ponds and pump stations within the first development areas, such as the 2 secondary plan areas, to proceed. And again, that's dependent on development needs within the area. So beyond that, as development proceeds, need for sanitary servicing will be identified. The trunk sanitary sewers have been installed, as we talked about, and where necessary will need to be extended to facilitate development, including local sanitary sewers, which will need to be extended. The level of development that can be accommodated prior to commencing necessary studies to expand the Little River Pollution Control Plant will be determined, and that will be included in our report. For stormwater management ponds and pump stations, they will be constructed as needed for development and allow associated drainage areas to develop. Temporary stormwater management facilities will be discouraged as much as possible, so that these comprehensive study stormwater facilities can be used by multiple property owners. From a transportation network perspective, the existing road network will support the initial stages of development. Several already completed EAs have established upgrades completed for the Lausanne Parkway extension, the upgrade of the County Road 42 area, and the construction of the East-West Arterial roadway. Urbanization of the proposed rural roadways is recommended also to provide necessary active transportation linkages. And as development proceeds, the traffic demand will warrant the need to widen 8th and 9th concession, as we discussed, and to implement internal roadways. So our traffic analysis will provide some of those triggers and when those improvements will be needed. And as we discussed, many of the transportation components will require additional planning studies, such as the Schedule C EAs, before proceeding, unless they can be proceeded under a individual plan of subdivision. So from an implementation perspective, class environmental assessment approvals, again, just to reiterate, the sanitary and storm sewer and projects will be considered A+ projects, which can proceed without further consultation. Upon completion of this servicing plan, the city can proceed with implementation of ponds, trunk sewers, outlets, and prospective municipal drainage outlets, and stormwater pump stations, as they are scheduled B projects. Collector roads require additional EA work, including further consultation before implementation. The study will confirm land acquisition requirements as well as estimated costs for the Schedule B projects. For the stormwater management ponds and pump station, it should be noted that cost estimates for road networks, sanitary improvements, as well as other services will also be completed as part of this assessment. So implementation will be subject to property acquisition, development pressure and advancement, and availability of funding for these projects. In addition, as part of this work, we will be providing a development design manual to be specific for the study area and provide guidance to developers coming and developing in this area. The manual will provide specific infrastructure design criteria and flood mitigation measures that will need to be followed. From a development charge perspective, the city will recover development-related capital costs from new development. Area-specific DC study for the Sandwich South will be refined based on the findings of this Sandwich South servicing study. And as we discussed, we'll provide costs to feed into that study. The cost estimates will be for all the shared trunk, sewer, and water main facilities, as well as the stormwater management ponds, pump stations, and roadways. The findings of this study will also be fed into the Sandwich South Growth Management Study. That will also be completed from Ensign. From a next steps, so we are currently, this is Public Information Center number 2. We are approaching stage 4 of the EA process. We will be confirming the preferred options based on this round of consultation and proceed with preparing an overall strategy based on comments we receive and moving to the reporting stage. Once the reporting is done, as well as the completion of those other relying studies, we will proceed with the council report. It's estimated that this project will be completed at the end of the year. So the more immediate next steps are to review the comments from this PIC, to confirm functionality of the proposed improvements, develop cost estimates for the associated development charge study. We are going to identify priority projects that will need to be implemented first to allow development to proceed. We will recommend an implementation plan on those projects and refined land requirements for Schedule B projects. So we will complete a master plan, which will include the documentation of the consultation and design process, identify the need for future EAs, and present the final master plan to council, at which time a notice of completion will be distributed and the report will be provided for review for a minimum of 30 days. There is a new Part 2 order process, which will be, it's available online and will be part of the notice of completion process. So from an upcoming survey, if you visit the project website, which is www.sandwichsouth.ca, you'll be able to review the materials presented today at this presentation, as well as figures and a detailed comparative evaluation summary. That material will be posted on the website tomorrow, available for your download and review. And there's a link here to an online survey to be completed as well to provide feedback. Okay, so I think that's the end of my presentation. I'll hand it over to Carla.
Great. Thanks very much, Laura and Ryan, for the information. As I mentioned earlier, there's lots of information on this project, but it will be posted, as Laura said, and you'll have till the 30th to go through, review, and provide any additional comments. But we're happy to hear comments here today or take any questions. So there's, as mentioned earlier, there's two ways to do that. One is to go into the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand. I see one hand is raised, so I'll get to you in just a minute. And then the other option is to chat questions in. So Laura, there are a couple of questions in the chat function. So Daniel, do you mind reading those off for us before I take the hand?
Sure, Carla. So Laura, both these questions I think are for you. The first is, can you please repeat the cost for sanitary sewers? And can you confirm if the existing homeowners throughout the city will be paying for this through their taxes?
Are you there, Laura?
Laura, I can help if you want, or I can try to field that question, or if you want to start, then that's fine too. I think.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. I will start with the sanitary sewer item. So per the city's policies related to sanitary sewers, any new sanitary sewer constructed will need to be a shared cost with property owners. I don't know if Patrick, you have any specifics on that references?
So yeah, so when a sanitary, there are policies in place basically of assessment rates to the residents. So the first response to that is that the overall trunk infrastructure, the provincial policy statement is pretty clear that development pays for development. So there will be and already is an area specific development charge implemented on the Sandwich South lands. And what it'll do is it'll put a per unit or well, basically a per unit cost for all of the trunk infrastructure identified on the units to be built. So the majority of the costs will be covered under area specific DCs. That being said, when sanitary sewers become available to the existing residents in the area, they will be assessed a share based on the frontage of their property. So I think we've got, since we've been doing the property owner meetings, we've got this Tony Icabelli on the line. I think we've got Peggy Hurley on the line too. They would have been assessed when the trunk sanitary sewer went in on 8th. So something similar would be done for the other areas with the other roads within the study area when the sewers are installed.
Great, thank you, Patrick and Laura. Daniel, you might as well continue with the written questions because I don't see anyone's hand up at this point.
Yeah, no problem, Carla. So the second question we received was, is the 1 to 100 year flood level the same as the Hurricane Hazel standard?
I think Ryan may be able to answer that question.
Yeah, so that's definitely a great question. So the regulatory extreme storm event for our area is actually the 1 in 100 year. Hurricane Hazel is reviewed, but through the analysis, it was determined that through looking at both the 1 in 100 year 24-hour event was determined to be the preferred regulatory level, both through IRCA and the third-party review team. So yes, we are looking at Hurricane Hazel, but the 1 in 100 year event is determined to be the final extreme water level to be reviewed for floodproofing elevations.
Thanks, Ryan. Another chatted question here. There is no mention of the greenhouse gas impact of the slides in the work presented. Can you please comment as to how this, especially the additional roads, will factor into Windsor's community energy plan target to reduce citywide greenhouse gases by 40% by 2041? And they're also wondering if this was evaluated in the work done so far.
I think we'll take back that question and we'll review it and provide a response for that particular question and how it will be factored in.
Okay. Another question here. Is there, and it's again going back to that first question that we asked. So is there any way that the city can approximate what the overall shared cost would be to the existing property owners? Is there a calculation that can be applied to our property size?
So again, Laura, if you want, I think what we can do is a follow-up to the meeting, we can post, there's been some refinements lately to the local improvement policy specific to the sanitary sewer charges. We can post the most current policy in the meeting or in the material available to everybody following the meeting. We can take that back and give them the current rates.
Thanks, Patrick. So the next question is kind of a two-parter. So the first question is why, when will this meeting recording be available? I think we can probably make it available as soon as we post the slides as well. And so they should be available at the same time. And the second part of this question is, why is there disregard for open swale systems to deal with the stormwater? How much more loose stormwater expected as per all the proposed new roads and hardscape versus leaving it as farmland? And they're also wondering how precisely the city is collecting money for all the new infrastructure.
So related to the disregard for the open swale systems, so to support development, we're proposing the linear stormwater management pond concept. We looked at from a storm sewer perspective to develop areas, whether an open swale concept would be viable. Based on this assessment, we have determined that a traditional stormwater sewer network is preferred. There's limitations with the open swale system, including the need for expanded land areas to provide enough space to provide the necessary conveyance capacity for development. In this study, we are assuming that the development, which could be commercial or residential, will have increased impervious areas, which will increase the stormwater runoff. And our proposed stormwater management ponds will reduce the runoff to an acceptable rate as they are stored and released by those pump stations that we talked about at a slower rate. So it would be very difficult to provide open channels for some of this major stormwater flow that we would see in this area. And it would also have a higher maintenance cost as well. The other question is how the cities will be collecting money for new infrastructure. So as it was discussed, there is going to be a area-specific development charge study, which will outline what costs are associated with the infrastructure required, and will provide a strategy on how that cost is shared to developers within this area based on the area of their development. Is there anything else you want to comment, Patrick, on that?
I just wanted to maybe reiterate a bit that the question of how precisely is the city going to collect funds related from development for the new trunk infrastructure, that's precisely why we're doing this study, is so that we can assess what's needed trunk infrastructure wise and try to get as accurate of estimates as we can for what it's going to cost to fully service the area.
It's Carla here. I just wanted to jump in just on one point of clarification in case it wasn't clear for people that Laura, I think I heard you say that the additional runoff that will come from the additional roads and the development has been incorporated into the calculations done for the size of the stormwater ponds. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. And just a reminder, since I'm here, that if you want to raise your hand, the reactions button on the bottom right, you can raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute yourself and you can verbally express your question if you'd like. But until that time, Daniel, is there another one in there?
Yeah, we just got another question. So when will the 2-lane urban roadways be constructed and are the locations considered final?
So The existing collector roads, such as 7th concession and 8th concession, there's no proposal to modify the locations of those roadways. Where we have identified the need for those roadways to expand to a 4-lane cross-section to accommodate a greater volume of traffic, would require those right-of-ways to be expanded, which will require associated Schedule C studies. For any roadways that don't currently exist, the exact alignment and location of those roadways would need to go through, again, another planning study or be established through a draft plan of subdivision. So they are shown more schematically using our best management practices, and the actual exact alignment of those are subject to refinement based on more detailed review of those areas. Hope that answers your questions.
Thank you. Another question here related to stormwater. What is the precise amount of extra stormwater or the quantity for the new ponds?
Laura, if you like, I could probably answer that.
Sure.
So the modeling for the stormwater management took into consideration future development areas to be controlled to a 6 liters per second per hectare, which was considered to be adequate based on outlet capacity assessment for the downstream receivers within the Sandwich South Master Planning area. So the precise amount of extra stormwater will be based on the quantity control for each swim feature within each contributing area. So that would all be detailed in the final stormwater management report. But in summary, each area of future development will be controlled to a strict release rate to not provide any adverse impacts on the downstream system, as well as provide a normal level of water quality to obviously filter out and provide clean water to the downstream watershed.
Thanks, Ryan. Could you also clarify a bit what management means? There's a question here wondering if it only means to hold it and then slowly dump it back into the river, or does management mean something more?
Yeah, so stormwater management is both dealing with water quantity control, so dealing with the volume of water that would be going off of the hard surface, controlling it to a very slow release rate into the downstream system to not cause any negative impacts to the overall watershed. And then water quality control, which would be through water sediment dispersion through the stormwater management's permanent pool features. So the ponds would be providing a dual function, filtering through the permanent pool and through forebays, as well as providing water quantity control to slowly release the stormwater into the downstream system. So temporarily hold it during large storm events.
Great, thank you. And Carla, it looks like there's a hand raised now, so I'm going to throw it to you to take that one.
Paolo, can you unmute yourself and ask a question for us?
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, yeah, it's Paulo Colovino. We have PCR constructors in the buildings here on County Road 42 in the Herx building. Just wondering, when the time comes to do 42, I think what I saw in the video was it was going to be a 4-lane road, from what I think I saw in the presentation. When will we know roughly how much of our property will be expropriated or taken from us? Because we have certain things in place here, and like we have septic systems and stuff like that, and weeping beds and stuff. Like, is there a timeline on when we could be informed on when possible construction could happen, or what do we have to do to prepare for that?
Thanks for the question. So for County Road 42, on the city's website, it's a completed environmental assessment, and on the city's website, you can review the environmental assessment, and in that document, there are some design plates that show the alignment of County Road 42 and identify land acquisition requirements to accommodate that land, the improvements there.
So it looks like the information is available on where it is. Patrick, did you have some further commentary on the timing?
You're muted, Patrick.
Just sorry about that. Just some further elaboration about the information already available. It is on the website. You'll see the design plates. Most likely before construction goes through, or at the same time, the city's probably going to have to look at extending the sanitary sewer to your frontage, to the frontage on 42 as well. So there will probably be some further consultation with the affected landowners in advance. In terms of timing, the city has some money in the capital budget to start with improvements at the intersection of County Road 42 and Lozon Parkway. The intention at this point is, from my understanding, to progress west, but we don't have nearly enough money on the books right now, so it'll be subject to future funding. But you guys will have, there'll be advanced notification to the property owners, so we understand the situation that you're in. You're going to have to prepare for changes basically when the road gets redone.
Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate the answers there. So I'll try to find the information on the website there, and I'll review it. But I thank you for the information thus far.
Thanks, Paolo. Anyone else have a comment they want to make? Anyone else want to raise their hand? And
I'd just like to, further explain. I think Mr. Han has been putting some additional comments in the chat. So the stormwater management facilities will be facilitated with a sediment forebay, and that sediment forebay will slow the velocity of incoming storm runoff and allow suspended solids to accumulate through the permanent pool and convey down to the bottom of the pond, where sediment will be accumulated. And over a long period of time, as sediment gets accumulated, there will be a proper operation and maintenance of that forebay for cleanout. So overall, the stormwater management facility as a whole will provide that water quality treatment. So in general, there will be clean water coming out of each of the stormwater ponds and into the receiving water course.
thanks for that clarification, Ryan. Mr. Ballas, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question or provide your comment?
We can't hear you.
You're still on mute, Mr. Ballas. Let me see if I can, no, I can't unmute you. The bottom left-hand corner is where the mute button is.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, certainly do hear you now.
William Ballas, I have some property there on County Road 42, just west of Little River, across from the airport property. I guess where I want to start, is it possible to go back to one of the maps so we can discuss that a little bit?
Certainly. Which map were you
I'm
looking
looking
for?
at the one that provided the ponds, which I'm in length. Possible?
Life in reverse here for a minute. There you go. Is that the one you're looking for?
To some degree there. I guess one of the questions I'm having is that as I look at that particular map and I see as our property is, which is just north of the woodlot below there in the south, the flow of drainage running along County Road 42, if I'm correct, dumps into the ponds in front of me. Am I reading that right? Or seeing it right, pardon me?
Yeah. So our preliminary review of this area, we've allocated the trunk storm sewer that's located along County Road 42 to utilize that pond. And that's what that size of that pond is based on.
Okay, so that's what I just wanted to make sure. There's little dark slashed lines around some of the ponds. What does that mean?
These dashed lines here.
Yes.
And in here. So at each of the storm sewer outlets to the ponds, to provide that quality control that we talked about, sediment control forebays are required. And these are areas where the stormwater comes in and it forces the water to slow down, and it forces some of that sediment to fall out of the water once that water gets into the stormwater pond. So that's just outlining where those areas are. It just requires some grading of the stormwater management ponds to accommodate that quality control.
Okay.
So some of them are inline and some of them you can see these bulb out areas offline.
Right.
That's what those
So
are.
that's what I was curious. The other thing too is compared to what was shown previously in PIC 1 and some other discussions that were held, we were talking about more about ponds. Now we're getting into this long, stretched out pond of an entire area, which seems to be somewhat very changed from what was originally presented. And then the question comes into play that you've indicated or during the presentation that you've had discussions with the Windsor Airport, which then raises my question to how is it that it's permitted now in the vicinity of the airport that wet ponds are permitted? Because that was a big issue that was not to be permitted.
So Laura, I can probably provide a quick answer to that. I was involved in the conversations with the City of Windsor Airport, and their recommendation was that they didn't want to have very wide permanent pools in these stormwater facilities. They would allow wet ponds within these airport zones. However, they recommended that they would be more long and narrow, and the banks of the facility be constructed with waterfowl mitigation measures. So very large plantings and things that would mitigate against waterfowl coming into the system. So based on those recommendations, that is why the facilities were now tried to maintain as narrow as possible, where waterfowl mitigation measures such as large natural plantings can actually hang over the permanent pool. So then it would actually discourage waterfowl from landing.
So
Yeah,
then
we have our landscape team is going to be providing some more specific recommendations on exact plantings and recommended measures. And those will need to be incorporated into the detailed design done for these stormwater management ponds in satisfaction to the airport and the city as each pond gets put online.
which then leads me to the next question dates back to when there was a discussion of why aren't we using the airport property to support stormwater management system for the upper Little River. All right. If that is permitted 40 meters across the road from the airport, why aren't we utilizing the airport property?
Stormwater management ponds will be
Of
placed.
minimize the amount of private lands to be purchased? That's a question.
That's a good point. So there are stormwater management ponds required within the airport areas to serve those specific drainage areas. And the point that you raise is well taken. And we are looking at ways that we can, instead of draining the stormwater of these areas and County Road 42 into the pond to the south, if we can redirect that to the areas to the north, that is something that we are going to look at. So it will have less impact on developable land and have more of a footprint impact on the airport land. So that is a comment that we received, we understand, and we will be looking at potentially redirecting some of that drainage area and understanding if it's feasible and looking at conflicts, et cetera. So we will look at that.
Because the understanding is that those are all employment lands that are available. So we can use those employment lands of the airport property and not impact the private landowners that will be asked to forfeit their developing lands. So that's my point.
Mr. Ballas, before you have another point, Patrick had his hand up, so he may have something to add. So Patrick, was there anything he had to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Laura's comment to that for the benefit of the greater good. Mr. Ballas's land is directly impacted by the stormwater management facilities proposed within the County Road 42 area, and we've had some fairly extensive discussions with them, and there will be ongoing consultation through the end of the project. And the point of the use of the airport lanes has been brought up before, and we think that it does need to be taken into consideration. So just to elaborate on what Laura said there a bit.
So Mr. Ballas, I'm sure you've got some other questions, but so maybe one or two more, and then we've got a couple in the chat, if that sounds okay with you.
Okay, good. The other question I have is on the lower portion of your map, you're showing drainage that is coming along the Lausanne Parkway, but then you don't show anything to the north. So the water north of Baseline Road is going where? Let me ask.
So the drainage for the Lausanne Parkway specifically?
Yes,
So we're not showing the local storm sewers required to drain the Lausanne Parkway right of way. We are showing the trunk storm sewers required to provide the development. So there's going to be other storm sewers beyond those showing on the plan here. And that is something we will be looking at a little bit more closely so we understand what the implications are.
yes, because there's still discussions of as it relates to the corridor and the size that relate to the discussions of the shifting of the Lausanne Parkway, which is in further discussions. But I was just concerned because in the previous maps of the Lausanne Parkway, they showed various waters being drained on the Lausanne Parkway. So that's why I asked that question in both directions, going north to the County Road 42, and as well as going north to of County Road 42. So I was very interested in that. And the fact that in your map presentation of the ponds, you don't show any ponds north of us, which should be something that's done, I guess.
Yeah, I think we can maybe make it more clear. All the darker green corridors are reserved for stormwater management ponds through the Upper Little River findings. The ponds that you see are on the screen are the ones that we have at this point delved in a little bit more closely and completed a functional design. We're focusing on the 2 secondary plan areas at this time because that's where the first phases of development are anticipated. So there will be other stormwater management ponds in those external areas, but we won't be refining the stormwater management ponds for most of those areas as part of this study, but they will exist. So a point noted that we could make it more clear.
Okay, another question that I want to raise is you're showing on the maps with the road of the multiple links and paths, bike trails. And if we can switch to that if possible.
Mr. Ballas, do you mind if we just, because the 2 questions in the chat are actually still about stormwater. So would you mind if we take those first and then move to the transportation? Would that be okay? Okay,
Sure.
Great. Daniel, do you want to read these out?
Sure. So the first question is, does the Zone 2 flood fringe extend over the hospital site? And if so, will that impact or preclude future expansions?
So the zone 2 flood fringe does extend over the hospital site. And as per the slides for the floodplain mapping, development is allowed within that flood fringe area as long as it meets the regulatory floodproofing elevations that will be dictated by the Essex Region Conservation Authority at the time of functional design. So yes, the areas within the flood fringe areas will be will be allowed for development, but with regulatory floodplain requirements.
Thanks, Ryan. And the second question is, why not GI at the side of all roadways instead of supersized linear ponds? And I apologize, I'm not sure what GI is referring to.
Green infrastructure.
Yeah, it's green infrastructure, and we have looked at that. But overall, the findings of the use of green infrastructure or low impact development techniques, specifically within the area, are very difficult to achieve a level of water quantity control. And that's primarily due to our underlying soil conditions. It's very hard to infiltrate soil, stormwater runoff through clay soils. So typically, at a lot level, you can provide some green infrastructure for water quality control, but overall during large extreme storm events, it would be very difficult to achieve the infiltration needed to provide an adequate design.
Great, thank you. I think that, there's one more question that relates to that about where does the water go now?
Yeah, so under existing conditions, obviously a lot of these undeveloped lands have field tile drains that will be directing the majority of the storm runoff to the receiving municipal drains. All the municipal drains within this Sandwich South area all eventually collect into the Little River drain and then continue north into the Detroit River. Under extreme storm events, there's what's called depression storage on a lot of these farm fields. roads. And what that is just, topographic ponds, natural ponds that are kind of sitting within these farm fields where water sits for a long period of time through the watershed. So that's kind of where the water does go. And that was all taken into consideration during the Little River floodplain mapping study when we were looking at the regulatory updates.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So Mr. Ballas, I believe you had some additional questions regarding transportation. So I'm not sure if you've muted yourself again, but if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, oh, wait a minute.
Nope, we can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the one where it showed the trails
Yeah, I don't have that part of this presentation, but it will be posted online.
Okay. I think that then it relates to the same question that if we talk about the sanitary sewers, you in previous presentations provided sewers being part of the build, but right now we're only going to deal with the two along the 9th concession and the 10th concession, if I'm correct. So as it relates to the trails, are there trails that were previously provided under the County Road 42 multiple use trails? Are those disappearing or are they going to still appear? There was one that was put in just on the border of my property line going south, running into the new road and crossing Baseline Road, which obviously you don't have that particular map.
So those lines on that map show conceptually where linkages will exist. So as part of the stormwater corridors and the ponds, like discussed and shown in the cross section of the pond, adjacent to the pond, there will need to be maintenance corridors provided, and there's an opportunity to utilize those maintenance corridors as recreational trails. So the exact alignment of those trails will not be known as part of this study, but there will be an area allocated for those recreational trails adjacent to the proposed stormwater management facilities. Within the municipal right-of-ways adjacent to arterial collector roads, there will be active transportation facilities. Exactly what those transportation facilities will depend on a number of factors, but it will be the mandate of the city to utilize the AAA perspective, which is that all ages and abilities, to make sure that all main roadways will be accessible, not just by vehicles, but also, active transportation uses.
Okay, the next point is I see you have a road entering into the airport property off the new proposed road between the 9th and the 8th concession. Is that, what's the purpose of that? Do we know what the airport's planning there?
I assume you mean the loop the loop that goes north of County Road 22 or 42. I mean, is that what you mean, Mr.
That's the
Ballas?
one I'm referring to, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, what you'll see in the proposed land use plan is that ultimately there would be development in the vicinity of County Road 42. And so this is a conceptual road layout to provide service to the proposed development within that area.
Okay.
So there are no specific plans that are.
The next question is to the templates of the County Road 42 and the 9th concession roundabout. There is also a jettison of entry into the airport property also, which you do not show, which I thought would have been addressing the type of road or purpose of roads to be futurely proposed, which is not there. So is that something that's not going to occur or still is on the agenda?
So there are, if you look at the other transportation EAs that were completed for this study area, you will see connections to some of the arterial roads that are not necessarily shown on here. That doesn't mean that they won't necessarily happen or are needed to provide connectivity. Our main focus with the development of this plan is to provide the minimum collector roads, to provide service of the area. I don't know if Sean, who's on the call, if you have anything to add from that perspective.
Sorry, just had to find my unmute button. Laura, I would just say exactly what you said. We're showing a conceptual road to show that obviously we would provide road connections into the lands north of 42. The exact location of those roads and would be determined by the additional environmental assessment work that you referred to earlier for the collector roads. I would also add, and exactly what you just said, additional connections beyond these roads that are shown on this map certainly could be made. We didn't intentionally delete, for example, a connection into the airport lands that aligns with 9th concession through the roundabout. We simply, given the scale of the map and the magnitude of that connection, didn't show it.
So I just want to put a thought out there that for our team, that Mr. Ballas is raising a number of points about information that's out there in other studies. And so I think we just need to make sure, and we will make sure, and when we put this ultimately in the environmental study report, that we clarify the relationship between this study and some of those other pieces. So
If the next map we could go to is to the large map of the entire area of land use, if we could.
can we just ask a couple of questions that came through the chat that are related to the transportation? So one of them is that will bike lanes be included along Lausanne, and will cyclists be able to reach the area by bike?
Yeah, so as part of the Lausanne EA, the Parkway extension, and that again is available on the city's website under the completed environmental assessments page, you will see that on both sides of Lausanne Parkway, a multi-use path is proposed that will extend all the way from the northern reaches of the Lausanne Parkway to the south. So that'll connect the portion of Windsor north of the city area to this area. I hope that answers the question.
Does Mr. Hanna is asking related to this for a road section drawing and questioning. I think Mr. Hanna, clarify if I'm getting this wrong, but questioning having active transportation adjacent to 80-kilometer 4- and 6-lane highways.
Yeah, so the active transportation will have to be suitable for the roadway that it will be on. So in the Lausanne Parkway instance, there are multi-use paths that are off-road in this instance, but we are looking at both, two examples of what could be looked at are cycle tracks and also protected bike lanes. So there's a number of different facilities, and the actual facility that will be proposed on each collector road that we're proposing would have to be suitable to the type of road that is being proposed. So we aren't being very specific on the exact what type of facility will need to be used. That'll need to be evaluated at the next EA planning stage, and then also in detailed design, because there's a number of factors like parking and driveways and other components that need to be considered.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just to add to that, there's a general recommendation in our active transportation master plan that as we build out facilities, we follow the Ontario Traffic Manual, basically provincial best standards for cycling facilities. So as those documents are updated, we would be following those for the designs of each of these projects as they move forward.
Great, thanks everybody for that. Mr. Ballas, you wanted to speak about land use?
Yes, I've wished to raise the point that you're showing a map here of the land use proposed for this area for the Sandwich South District. And I think it's important to make sure that we understand and let everyone know that the next step after this is those lands that are marked as stormwater management corridor and open space and park will be rolled into a map called and they will be identified as non-core natural heritage. Okay, which is important to let everyone know what happens there, which then leads to the definition of what does that mean? Well, then you have to go to the greenway system, which rolls it into the greenway system and identifies stormwater management, open space and parks as one title, just below the core natural heritage identification areas. The point to be made is, again, and it has not been raised and identified, in the section of the greenway system, it states that private lands can be identified, and in that does not imply that the city will purchase those lands. So I guess the question is, what happens and how long does one wait?
Patrick, is that something that you're able to respond to? I think if I got the question right, the greenway system does not identify that there's a purchasing requirement for land. So how does that work is kind of the question you're asking, right, Mr. Ballas?
Yes.
Patrick, I don't know if you're the right. Oh, there.
I'm unmuted now, sorry. So the purpose of this study is not to refine land uses. So the land, it's to elaborate on already completed land uses. So the greenway systems and or I guess stormwater management corridors are coming out of other studies. So the idea is to refine what's already there in terms of whether or not we're going to take the land for free. I mean, I don't think that's possible. I think the city has a couple of ways of acquiring land. I think we can consult further with the legal department following the meeting, but I think we either have to negotiate for it and pay for it, or the city has to appropriate it or expropriate it. And I think in both cases, the owner is compensated based on market rates. But I mean, maybe we can take that away and follow up.
I wish to clarify, the word statement says does not imply. So we're not talking whether they do it or take it or not. The question is, what if they don't? Because then you leave the lands designated as they are. That's the point I'm wishing to have clarified.
Okay, so
if you understand my question now.
So the question is whether or not the lands identified as greenway will be refined if they're not actually used as stormwater management corridors and compensation given to the landowner?
Or revert the lands back to whatever they are. All I'm saying is when you leave it that way in the definition, there's no action required to be taken by the city. It could sit for the end of time. That's where my concern.
So the intent. Okay, so the intent of this study is to establish what's needed for the stormwater infrastructure and associated linkages that Laura is speaking to in terms of the green corridors, or she was referring to them as natural heritage corridors. The intention is to release what is not needed for infrastructure back to the landowners to be used basically in accordance with the surrounding already approved land uses. So the intent would be to give the land back to the developer if they're not needed for swim facilities.
And
so the mechanics of that will have to be, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I understand that. The only thing is my point was that you need to provide that information to the public, all right, as well as just how you clarified it to me, all right, is where the end result comes down the road, and not that somebody gets surprised and then finds out what the greenway system conditions mean, which then reverts back to my lead question, if you've answered it, is one of the questions that we're going to be expecting to be refined here is how much land does one have that will be needed for stormwater management, therefore removing the amount of land that can be developed. But we also really need to know how much land we have left to develop. And you've had indication that various studies will be completed, released. So prior to the Sandwich South Master Servicing Plan going before council for their stamp of notice of completion. So I'm trying to get an understanding, because there's so many projects that are going out there that are all interconnected to this, as well as all those plans that are completed, because they have great impacts. All right.
Oh, so let's see what Patrick has to respond to that. You've got your hand up, Patrick. You're on mute though.
Yeah, sorry, I keep muting myself when I'm not talking. Your question is a good one. You're right. So in terms of what's needed for the swim facilities, specifically, that's only going to get at the completion of our study, that's only going to get answered with certainty for the 2 secondary plan areas, because those are the 2 areas that were satisfying Schedule B requirements for under the Class EA process. The other areas, it's going to identify the corridor still, but it'll be subject to a similar future Schedule B requirement and/or public consultation to refine the corridor widths for the other areas. So we're going to an extra level of detail for the 2 secondary plan areas because the land uses are more established based on the Planning Act approvals for the secondary plans.
Okay, and I guess my point, I just wanted people to realize that when they look at this plan and following County Road 42 secondary plan, as well as the East Pelton, that, okay, what's the end result? So not that anyone gets surprised. It's more of a just a general notification to the public is what really happens here. What has happened in County Road 42? All right, that was my intentions. All right, so that people get the view. I have related questions, which you've answered and indicated. But I guess my concern is that you have major plans to be completed, like the floodplain, new mapping or revising the floodplain, which relates to various areas that are being developed. You have the Upper Little River that is supposed to be still completed, has to still go before the council for a new notice of completion. You have the management study to be evaluated also and completed. I guess from a timing perspective, I'm a little curious as to how all this is going to fall into play.
So I think maybe what's necessary here is to provide clarity, and I'm not sure if we can at this meeting, but to try and provide clarity on which studies need to get completed before this study is completed. I don't know, Patrick, or Laura, if we can answer that today, or if that's something we need to take away and document in the notes. But if I understand what Mr. Ballas is asking, he's asking when is this study going to be done that's going to define the stormwater needs, and does it have to wait for all of these other studies to be completed?
So the point being raised by Mr. Ballas is a valid one. There's several ongoing studies that have yet to be finalized. They will need to be finalized prior to the master servicing plan being finalized. So we're stating that our intention is to finish our project by the end of the year. The other studies would be required to be finalized beforehand. So,
if I may ask, when you say your project will be finalized, is that the one that will be released to council, or are we already past that point? And it's gone to
no, we're not past that. We're not past that point at all. So we're still in the public consultation phase based on preliminary preferred alternatives. We're going to take the feedback back that we get from all of the public consultation and further refine the concepts. And then we're going to put together final recommendations, which will be given to council for approval, as well as posted for public review.
So that'll be sometime in the new year then, am I correct on that? If I understand what you just said?
Well, so the intention is to try to finalize it by the end of the year, but we'll have to see how we do, because like you said, there's a lot of moving parts and there's some outstanding studies that also have to get finalized.
Okay, so just so I understand your definition of the project complete, you mean a fully completed project, or is that the definition that I'm hearing?
Sorry,
yeah, maybe what, Carla, do you want to take it?
I was just gonna say, let's put a pin in this. So I think what let's call complete being the point in time where it's the 30-day review period. So Patrick, is that reasonable to say that the aim, subject to things changing, is to get the 30-day review period started before this year? I think Mr. Ballas is just trying to understand when complete is.
What is defined by completed project? So that's what I would like specifically outlined.
Yeah, so satisfying the requirements of the EA in terms of public consultation and coming up with preferred alternatives. So our intention at this point is to do that before the end of the year. We'll notify everybody with an updated schedule as we progress here.
And that's what I'm just rephrasing it and just making reassuring so that the presentation of the final document and it being submitted to council, all right, tentatively, all right, and the 30-day review period does not occur until the new year, if as a schedule. It's not something written in stone, but it's more or less understood.
Right. So we cannot finish this project until some of those others are completely finished. We can take it a significant way towards completion or 30-day review period, but there is a chance that we may have to pause getting to that 30-day review period until other studies are finished. And because we need the final results of those studies to finalize our report for the 30-day review period.
Okay, so on the word pause, I'm just going to pause it there for a minute and I'm going to go to Daniel for a couple of the questions that have been sent in the chat, just to give some other people a chance to get their questions raised. Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, thanks, Carla. There was a question asked earlier about whether or not an updated area comprehensive soil tests were completed for the study area.
So as part of this study, we engaged a geotechnical consultant, and it was we completed a desktop study of the area. So no actual site soil testing was completed, but we did collect soil information of the study area through a desktop study.
Thanks, Laura. And then the next questions are all kind of related to density. So Mr. Hanna asks, the typical Windsor medium density really means extended low density. So his question is, why are there no condensed high density hubs proposed? And then Philippa, adding to that, is wondering if the absence of high density hubs is because the expected population is just a portion of the 8,000 total population growth to 2036, or in other words, that the expected population will be low relative to the land being developed. So is there somebody on the team who can address the lack of condensed high density?
It looks like Patrick has his hand up, so go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah. So again, the purpose of this study is not to establish land uses. The purpose of this study is to take land uses which have been established by planning studies which have been done, which are secondary plans for 2 of the areas, and figure out how to service it with trunk infrastructure requirements. So the density that you see in front of you is stuff that's been established by the planning department or through public consultation secondary plans.
Thank you. And I think that also addresses that last question there about why there's no thought towards integrating farmland with condensed development in a new way. I think that's it for the typed comments.
There is one more here, Daniel, isn't there, about the city's green standards?
Or
was that answered already?
No, you're right. There's a question that asks, will the City of Windsor create a green infrastructure policy and a set of standards similar to the one that Toronto has done?
So that's not part of this project, as far as I understand. So I don't know if anyone on the call knows whether it's in the book, so to speak.
The only thing I would add.
Outside the scope.
Yes, correct. It's outside the scope of this project.
The only thing I would add is, like it was discussed previous in the report, we are preparing a development manual, which will provide municipal servicing infrastructure guidelines on the design criteria needed to guide developers to develop in this area, to make sure that everyone is going from the same playbook as far as the development of infrastructure design. Some of the recommendations that came out of the sewer master plan that was completed for flood mitigation will be incorporated into that study. So I think that answers the second part of that question.
Yeah, and just to add that there is a number of pilot projects throughout the Windsor-Essex area where we are looking at utilizing green infrastructure and low impact development techniques. So those are being monitored over a long period of time to look at the feasibility of infiltration rates through some of the clay soils. At this time, the IRCA guidelines identify that LIDs cannot be accepted as a stormwater quantity control measure at this time, but there will be future addendums that could be released where future monitoring of these pilot projects would actually make LIDs more acceptable. But at this time, they're not recommended for the prime source for water quantity control and stormwater management.
Okay, is there any other, we've got about 10 minutes left. Is there any other comments that people wanted to raise? Any other hands raised? Mr. Ballas, I took your, oh, perfect, there you are. I muted you, so you're gonna have to unmute your mic. Bottom left-hand corner, there you go.
Okay, yeah, I guess one of the questions, if I can just show the map, I can't remember the maps that occur, but is this map part of the presentation? No?
Yeah, that's what's
In front of you.
was it?
This is a zoomed in view. I think we spoke about it earlier. I think that's the management strategy. The stormwater management strategy map that we spoke earlier. I just wanted to touch base. Okay, that's one of them here. If I can start with, you've got in the index, you've got a solid red line, and then there's a red dash line in the larger scale map. What does the red dash line mean compared to the? Yes.
That is, it's just the study area boundary.
Yes, but in the larger map, you have the large solid red line that defines the entire Sandwich South District, and then you have this little dashing line that seems to go around the airport. What does that mean, if I may ask?
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have it in front of me here. But
It is a good question because the other map study area goes on the left side of the airport. So
yeah,
we'll have to
Yes,
get back.
it was just, and it says study area. And I said, well, wait a minute, you've got a dash and the other one. But you can look at that and get back to me on it. The other one is, I just want to go back to the ledger of this map. Again, we talked about it earlier. Because you have something there that says, and I just wanted to see what the ledger states. If I didn't catch it, which seems to be an error. Just not that people get a misconception. If we can go to that one again,
So can you go to the land use map again, Laura?
the zoomed in.
If you're moving it on your end, it's not moving on our end. There we go.
Okay, not the full map, the smaller one. Does that have a ledger on it also? I think that was the stormwater management. We were talking of this, or is this map not in the view?
I didn't include it in the presentation.
Not the large one. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I didn't include it in the presentation, so
Okay,
it shows
all right.
more of a broader
Okay,
view.
got it. I just wanted to, because there was some errors in the ledger
If you
identification.
can email me, or we can touch base after this call. We can
Sure,
sort
understand.
out those questions.
The next thing is you get in your presentation, you talked about the Part 2 order and the 30-day period. And I think it's important that everyone realizes now that based on the Part 2 order, if anyone still does not seem satisfied with the corrections or adjustments or addressing their consultation or concerns, that after that 30-day period, there will be no more further opportunity under the new Part 2 order that permits an individual to submit a Part 2 order to the ministry. It will not be reviewed and will not be allowed unless the matter has to deal with the Indian Affairs or Indian Act. So I just want to let people know that once that 30-day period occurs, yeah, you can review it, but nothing will be done. So I just want to make sure that you've missed it and you didn't address it, but I think it bears notice at this time. That's a very important point, and how important it is everyone to address and raise their concerns to this team as it relates to the Sandwich South Master Servicing Plan. That was
Great. Thanks, Mr. Vallis. I did want to make sure we give time. There is Mr. Hanna also had his hand raised, so I'm hoping that we can give time for him to unmute himself and ask his questions. Go ahead, Mr. Hanna.
Well, just the fact of the Tranby Park and Bell Parish and all that, yeah, that's a good beginning for Windsor. But, you know, the lid demo projects, like this has already been done by the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority for years and years and years. That's, in fact, part of the reason why Toronto has green standards policy, because they've been on this for years. And so to me, it's almost like you know, like political PR projects in a way. Like, okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit because I'm not saying that they're not good. They are good. But, you know, like it's just slowing things down. We need to have actual full-fledged green infrastructure policy. And if we can't have it for this new subdivision, then nothing really is going to be accomplished. You know, it's just going to be supersized, the same old kind of stuff. So my question is, and when you're talking about your guidelines, that's nice. Like I have guidelines on how to, okay, I'm not going to be facetious, but you know, but policy is needed, not guidelines. Guidelines are meaningless. It means like, well, we'll think about it Tuesday and maybe we'll do it Wednesday and maybe Thursday we'll forget all about it. You know, it's like, you need to have like an actual policy that has to be enforceable in a sense. And that can also have incentives as well as, you know, the stick if you want. But so basically, those are the two questions relative, because like we're wasting time when we're talking about demo projects because like they've looked at all different types of soil and climatic conditions. Yeah, Toronto's 250 miles north of us, but they have a lot of similar conditions in different spots of the city, and the climate is not much different, like a couple more sun days more down here a year, whatever. I'm exaggerating there, but like these tests have been done. The data is there. I know that for a fact.
So David, it sounds, I heard definitely a strong comment that the city should consider or should think about adding some policy as part of this study or part of something else about green infrastructure. So we've certainly noted that suggestion. Was there a specific question too? I wasn't sure you.
Well, you hedged on the developer manual. I mean, basically, like it's guidelines and they're not enforceable, right?
Okay.
So the guideline, you know, I'm calling it a guideline. The developer manual will stipulate the minimum design standards that each developer needs to adhere to. And upon review of any detailed design and other approvals required by the city would mandate those developers to adhere to that manual, unless there was some maybe some extreme measures otherwise. But generally, it's maybe a policy or a guideline are not the words, but this manual is used to allow the city to stipulate and to enforce the criteria needed to adhere to the servicing requirements that we're identifying through this study.
So let's let Anna has something to add. So Anna Godo from the city. So maybe she's got some information for us. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, just with respect to like low impact development and green infrastructure, yes, we have our design standards, but it's not so much policy. It's related to bylaws will have to be in place so that we can enforce maintenance of such things. So, you know, I understand that Toronto has done a lot of work, but we're still in the infancy here. And I know that's not what people want to hear, but we have to work through both from an enforcement perspective and from a maintenance perspective. So it is something that we are actively working on, but we're just not quite there yet.
Yeah.
What's slowing it down though? Is it political will? Money?
It's not necessarily political will because council has endorsed LID features, but it's not. If it was something that we would just transfer and require developers to maintain in perpetuity, would be one thing. So from like a medium density residential or condo type development, that it can be transferred there. But for things that ultimately have to be public infrastructure, the city will have to maintain it after we assume the work. So we're still working through those details.
Yeah, and just to
Right,
add
so-
to that, there has been a substantial amount of testing done. I have worked with the TRCA and the CBC in regards to some of our underlying soils here. And through coordination with the conservation authorities, it would be hard to make LIDs policy if we don't have enough research to identify that they actually could work here for water quantity control. And that's the biggest thing. We don't want to have to make our traditional infrastructure smaller to rely on low impact development techniques where the underlying soils will not actually allow for the infiltration. So our clay is a little bit different down here than it is in the Toronto region. And I think we've done a decent amount of studies and background through project work to prove that, and also through discussions with the CBC and the TRCA. So we need to have these pilot projects and these pilot projects to, at least confirm that the long-term LID strategy would be acceptable, or what we're going to find is that our traditional infrastructure is now undersized, primarily because the LIDs may actually not work in this area. So they would be good for smaller, more traditional storm events, but when you get into the extreme storm events, those soils do get saturated.
So I'm just going to jump in for a minute here because we are at 7 o'clock. And as I mentioned, we're happy to stay here for another half an hour, but there may be people who have other things on their schedule to do. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining us and really appreciate the conversation that we've had and encourage you to go and take a look at the materials when they're posted tomorrow and take a look at the survey. And as Daniel said, we will try our best to get the video up there tomorrow as well, barring technical difficulties. If not, it'll have to go up shortly after, but we'll do our best. And we encourage you to provide any additional feedback to us by the 30th of September. So do want to thank you in case you have to go, but as I mentioned before, we're happy to stay around for another half hour. So thanks, everybody. Mr. Vallis and Mr. Hanna. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna make one other comment about LIDs. Right now, we're looking at those features as being a resiliency feature. So not for primary quantity and quality control, but from a climate change perspective. So that's how we're looking at those features.
Great, thanks, Anna. David and Bill, do you both have additional? You still have your hands up, but I'm not sure if those are leftovers.
Yeah,
do you have additional comments?
Yeah.
Okay.
If we can just kind of refresh ourselves on the point that you had about acquisitions and the parameters, there was a chart that you had. If I can just kind of look at that for a moment, if possible, if we kind of remember what it was.
Yeah, a moment. Here.
Yeah, and the mitigation part. So when you outline this impacts in mitigation, you've got a property impacts. I guess the comment here is, does that apply to everything that's proposed to be purchased by the city as a requirement, whether it's stormwater management lands or stormwater corridor lands that we will be receiving the facilities? So is that all combined in one as it relates to the construction and requirements of the area? Am I understanding that correctly, and part of what was presented?
Yeah, so stormwater management facilities will be eventually city-owned facilities, and they will need to acquire the property to accommodate those facilities. The other components are proposed roadways, which the city would also eventually need to be the main owner of. This study is not providing the city the approval to obtain the roadways, but for the East Pelton and County Road 42 secondary plan areas, the property acquisition areas that we're identifying will allow the city to proceed with the necessary coordination with property owners for that land acquisition.
So that's what I just wanted to make sure I understood the clarification, so that as it's understood that there will be discussions and addressing the words of compensation for the property, which is good to hear as it's presented, if that's the final outcome. Because we have a situation where lands have been selected to support the stormwater corridor based on the options selected by the studies and the city of Windsor, and impacting them. And in some instances, even in your opening letters, you indicate that you will have other property owners will be able to do their own stormwater management solutions, all right? Where others will be required to carry the load of the stormwater management and not be able to develop their lands, and others will. So I just wanted to make sure we kind of cross that line there, as that's the understanding that I read there. Correct or not? Or over answering my question?
So yeah, the stormwater management facilities will be shared facilities. They'll provide outlet for the properties that are impacting and also the areas adjacent. And so those landowners for areas where the ponds won't be impacting, they will be assessed fees for all the costs related to providing the stormwater management. The reason why there's a comprehensive plan where there's one shared facility that will service multiple property owners is so that ultimately the amount of infrastructure that needs to be implemented and maintained over time can be consolidated. With stormwater management, the key is maintenance of those types of facilities in order for them to be as efficient as possible. And so it wouldn't be beneficial for the city for a number of privately owned stormwater management facilities to be owned kind of scattered along the study area. More comprehensive stormwater management facilities is a better strategy.
And I appreciate that explanation. I just wanted to make sure that as and everyone was well aware by their visual seeing of the property, is greatly impacted and has a great amount of land being redirected to the stormwater management corridor and minimizing very little of our lands for development. I guess that's the point. I wanted to make sure I understood it will be addressed as it's required and purchased. That was my point to be made. And I'm assuming you've reaffirmed me of that's the plan.
Yeah, I think I understand your question. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Hannah, you still had your hand up. Was that intended or is that left over? I know you have a comment in the chat, so.
Well, basically, just the aspect, I understand, it seems to be what you're saying is that you're worried about private developers not maintaining any sort of stormwater mitigation techniques on their own. But that's why you create policy such that it has to be maintained. We have standards, building standards now for safety, fire safety, for property maintenance and so forth. It's just another stretch of that to include stormwater management to put the emphasis on the developer themselves to take care of this so that we don't have to create all this huge, expensive, extra infrastructure any more than necessary. But here it's like it's opening the door saying, well, this is necessary because we don't have the policy, so we're not going to look into that.
Anna? You still have, you have your hand up. I
Again,
wasn't-
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so with respect to transferring this issue to developers, as I said before, that would work fine in relation to like a condo type development, apartment complex, that kind of thing. But where the developers, you know, develop the site, build houses, those properties then get sold to other people that become residents. We don't currently have it in place to enforce. And do we really want to transfer the responsibility for what is essentially should be municipal infrastructure to individual property owners? So that I just, again, as I said before, for like condo developments or where there's a, you know, overseeing, you know, property maintenance kind of thing, yes, that would work, but not, you know, in the example of like single family type of developments.
Thanks, Anna. Patrick, did you have something to add as well? You're on mute.
Sorry. Just to reiterate what Anna said, when it comes to single family plan of subdivision developments, the developer is responsible for servicing, providing initial servicing, and constructing the subdivision in accordance with city standards. And ultimately, that infrastructure is assumed by the city. And there's regular city streets with regular houses with individual taxpayers. So to Anna's point, it's not possible in all situations to, in perpetuity, require a developer to maintain a swim facility or an LID.
Great. Thanks, Patrick and Anna. And thanks all. Any other last comments and questions before we call it a night? Daniel, did I catch everything in the chat? Did we catch everything in the chat? I know, David, you've got some sort of ongoing commentary. So, oh, Philippa has a GHG question in here. Thanks for pointing that out, Philippa. I think we did talk about that, and I believe that was the one that
We're going to take that back because
Yeah.
we have to look into the details for that part of the team and exactly what they reviewed. We're
Yeah,
not
so that was the
ignoring it,
question
we
of-
just have to take it back.
Yeah. I'm just scrolling down to the bottom here. I think what we'll try and do with that GHG question, am I right, Andrea, that we'll try and put it in the notes, right? Okay, so when we put notes together for this meeting, it won't be right away. It's not going to be notes of this meeting. It's notes of the entire consultation section. So it will happen after we hear from all the comments that are received up till the end of the 30th. And then we'll put together a note for the whole, all of the comments and input received. Great. Patrick, go ahead.
Just a question to the general project team. When do we intend to post, or do we want to commit to a timeline to post the recording of this meeting online so that people can access it?
Daniel, you were suggesting that that we could do it at the same time as the slides, which is tomorrow, but is that doable?
Yeah, that's doable for the recording.
There you go,
Yeah.
tomorrow.
The PowerPoint presentation, as well as more detailed figures that we talked about and detailed report on the evaluation of alternatives will all be available. So logistically getting it up online, it's something that's happening tomorrow. But if anyone has any issues accessing that information, you can reach out to us and we can get that to you.
So I would call, just for clarity, I would call tomorrow, end of day tomorrow. So maybe skip tomorrow and look for it the next day, just in case it takes us a little longer to get things in the city to upload it than we anticipate. So. Okay, great. Well, thanks, everybody. Really appreciate everyone's participation. And we look forward to getting some additional comments and questions over the next few weeks. And thanks very much for joining us tonight. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.